The amazing thing that the UK government and some cities specifically have done is adopt a completely new approach. And so rather than trying to predict something that is impossible to predict, they just vision the future and say, this is what we want, this is what our citizens need. They have made the connection between better places and not only transport and the basic urban planning basics, but they've gone well beyond into mental health and having cities that are good for people, and they have taken the plunge and they have used an agile approach. So we've seen this transformation from a very conservative planning, which is there for a reason. I don't want to take merit out of it. It's important. But they've gone from, let's implement something quickly, test it, see where it fails, change it, test it again, and work towards a final product. And this is what the tech industry has been doing for years. And it moves really quickly and really cheap. And so now we're seeing that moving very quickly into the transport planning sector in the UK. And what we wanted to do as a team is help that make the norm.
Emergency funding, for example, the German government given of 50 billion has been incredibly useful. The creative industries alone to the UK economy contribute 111 billion a year. So we are an important industry to protect. And so we're all trying to find creative ways around this, even with streaming. 5 million streams makes you £12.34. So it really is critical to have some of that support and to have philanthropic support, because if we have neither model, we have nowhere to sort of fill that space.
I think for the energy transition, we were seeing before COVID happened, most analysts were saying we might see peak fossil fuel demand at some point in the 2030s. Those who were a bit more bullish on renewables were saying mid-2020s. Now those same analysts are saying actually it happened in 2019. The peak was last year. The CEO of BP was interviewed the other day and said, yeah, I think there's a decent chance that we've now passed peak fossil fuel demand. So this is not just kind of environmentalist types who are saying this. This is a real structural change in our economy, and that it will have some very profound consequences for our climate, for the energy system, and indeed for the financial system as well.
I've set out in my latest paper some 11 proposals for practical action, but actually all that is secondary just to a change of approach and attitude. In my view, the existing competition law, if looked at properly and revisited as it was originally intended, is quite capable of blessing or not catching the sort of things that we're talking about. But in the real world, we have a conservative establishment, and we need to see some positive steps from the authorities. We need to see them to spell out in speeches, in press releases, perhaps in positive decisions, in their guidance notes, what it is that you are allowed to do, and of course what you're not allowed to do. But they also need to give people more confidence. The UK's competition authority, the Competition and Markets Authority, has made a good start in that for the first time ever, its annual plan sets out as a strategic objective climate change and supporting the transition to a low carbon economy. Now we need to see how that plays out in what they actually do in terms of press releases and cases and so forth.
Safety has always been the priority, but we're moving in a different arena now where health and safety is a focus. So, we're looking at how we can ensure that passengers that travel have a positive experience and a secure experience as well, so that when they're joining on board the aircraft, we've actually had the aircraft flight crew all have their temperatures checked in advance. Passengers are required to wear masks at the moment, as are flight crew. But these are all things that are currently in place at the moment for the flights that are operating. Now, obviously, those measures that we're putting in place may be temporary, because obviously we're not sure as to what will happen going forward and how long that'll be required. But the industry is in a very uncertain situation right now, and there's lots of unknowns. So it's really a case of we're trying to manage based on what the requirements are and what the restrictions are globally, and how we can play within that.
So I think people have done a lot of work to catch up, and now they're sort of looking at this coming out of it and they're saying, well, what do we need to do to make sure that if this happens again, we've got the right processes and procedures in place to manage it. And I think, part of this challenge is looking at it and saying, well, do we need this? Is it going to cost us money? What do we need to do? And risk identification is going to be critical to that activity, and to think about the furlough scheme. So the government has said unconditionally, if your staff are furloughed, we'll pay 80% of their wages up to a certain amount, and they just did that. If this happens again, the government may say, well, you can have the money if you meet these conditions. And so some of your continuity planning might be around taking on board those conditions and what you need to have in place to demonstrate, your business viability under those conditions. So these are things that I think are going to come out, and people need to start thinking about, well, what would happen if it happened again and the government said, I'm only going to pay 50% of your wages, for example.